Thank you. Good afternoon. So my name is Josh Lerner. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization called the Participatory Budgeting Project. I'm joined by Karina Claudio from the New York City Council Speaker's Office. So Participatory Budgeting in New York City, or PBNYC, is the flagship US program for a growing movement that is tackling one of the deepest problems of our democracy: unequal participation in power. It's systematically changing government so that those who traditionally participate the least and have the least power are able to decide how their communities are governed. The biggest innovation of participatory budgeting is that it moves beyond consultation to give people real power over real money. People decide how millions of dollars are allocated in their community each year, coming together to brainstorm ideas, turn those ideas into real projects, and vote to decide which projects get funded. The New York Times calls this revolutionary civics in action, and it's improving parks, schools, and neighborhoods. PBNYC has grown sixfold since it launched in 2011, from $5 million in 4 districts to this year $32 million in 24 districts, around half the city. PBNYC also takes participatory budgeting to the next level in 3 ways. First, it's a model of co-governance, of officials and residents governing together. From the start, a steering committee of community organizations writes the rules for the process with staff. Each year, hundreds of residents develop project proposals with staff as well. Second, PBNYC not only engages marginalized communities, but empowers them. It organizes participants through targeted outreach. It builds their capacity, helping them understand government in their communities, and it builds their power, connecting them with hundreds of organizations. Third, PBNYC has been a laboratory for testing new civic technologies and tools that can then be applied more widely. So for example, we launched an open source idea mapping tool called Shareabouts, which has since been applied in other cities. PBNYC has already been replicated and transferred widely. The basic model can be adopted to any public institution that has a budget. Before PBNYC, there was 1 ward in 1 US city that was using participatory budgeting. Now there are 10 cities using it, and we're currently planning processes for county, state, and federal funds. PBNYC has been the leading model for this growth. It has by far the most participants, the largest budget, and the most political leadership, as Karina will explain.
Good afternoon. Participatory budgeting in New York City empowers residents that are often on the sidelines of civic participation. In the past years, we have documented that more than 1 in 5 voters had a barrier to voting in traditional elections. More than a third of voters were born outside of the US. Almost a quarter of ballots were cast in a language other than English. From start to finish, PBNYC enables residents to creatively propose solutions to real community concerns. It fosters leadership, critical thinking, and collaboration, exactly the skills necessary to bring about real social change in our city. This year, our 4th, we transformed PBNYC to engage 3 times as many New Yorkers as in previous years. To make sure we were connecting with hard-to-reach populations, we contracted with community-based organizations to do targeted outreach amongst low-income, public housing, LGBT, formerly incarcerated, and communities affected by Hurricane Sandy. We also empowered young people by lowering the voting age to 14 and allowing students to vote in their own schools. Not only did we employ grassroots strategies like door knocking and street outreach, but we also educated thousands of residents about the process through a text messaging program that connected them to local polling sites. We collaborated with a top-flight design firm to ensure that ballots are easy to use, and we translated them into 11 languages. These ballots were available in over 300 voting sites throughout the city. Several districts also featured digital voting sites and pop-up voting sites in community centers, parks, high schools, and public housing buildings. The results of these efforts were fantastic. Over 50,000 New Yorkers came out to vote, funding 113 projects throughout the city. Looking ahead to our 5th cycle, we are happy to announce that we plan to expand PBNYC into more city council districts and launch a parallel PB process just for public housing residents, the first in the United States. PBNYC will continue to enhance the civic participations of thousands of disenfranchised New Yorkers that would have otherwise not have a say in their community's future. One resident in the Bronx said to us this year, I've lived here 35 years and no one has ever asked me to make a decision about my community. That's what this process is all about: education, empowerment, and civic engagement. We look forward to making PBNYC a major and growing part of New York City government, and we thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Pete.
A question about, and this is difficult sometimes to prove a negative, but to what degree do you think the projects that were voted on and approved through the PB process were in any ways different than a direction that the council member may have been going in anyway?
I think that, the projects are developed by residents, through a neighborhood assembly. And then after that, they go into a process where they choose ideas. They consult with the city agencies on if these ideas are feasible. And the council members that commit to doing this process are really committed into, funding the projects that get the most votes. So, really.
Do you have any sense as to which, because they're feasible, it would be understandable that many of them would be known if there's a necessary add-on or amenity for a park bench or for park space or bus stops or something like that? Are there any particular stories where ideas that came out of the PB process may have been different than a particular council member may have been thinking about?
Yeah, so we see that there are a lot of projects that are traditional, things that would normally get funded, and a lot of creative, innovative projects that normally wouldn't be on the radar. So for example, a solar-powered greenhouse in public housing, where residents and young people learn gardening and get job skills. We saw that one project that's come up a lot through this is school bathroom repairs. Something that gets done, but not as much as it should. And because it came up through this process, it became a very political issue. And council then started advocating for more funding for school bathrooms across the board, and actually doubled the amount of funding for school bathrooms across the city, winning $50 million more for bathroom repairs. So it seems this has been a testing area to push forward policies either that aren't being done or maybe should be done, but haven't been getting the attention they deserve.
And go ahead, Ed.
I'm sorry. If I do the math right, there are 51 districts in New York City Council. You have 24. What's wrong with the other 27? Why haven't they signed up?
Yeah, so, one challenge that we've had is some council members, have said to us, this is very labor intensive. It takes a lot of time, it's a long timeline, a lot of resources, but, the speaker of the city council, my boss, is one of the pioneers of PBNYC, and, she's really committed central staff resources into the process. So, we have created a system where we are supporting district staff offices by giving them a space where they can do peer-to-peer consultation, where they can talk about best practices. We also have created a tons of trainings. We've created a fellowship program where we have public university students placed in the district offices. So we've given them a lot of support in that sense, and we will continue to do that as the process continues to grow. So we think we're going to have more council members join, and we're very hopeful.
Good.
Skip?
At what point will you hit scale, right? It is a labor-intensive process. Takes a lot of time. I'm sure there will be efficiencies gained over time through the use of technology. People will get more accustomed to following the process. But at some point, you'll be done. And what percentage of the budget of that? How participatory will that be when you arrive there in your mind? It would be interesting and perhaps challenging to do an entire budget. But at what point do you hit kind of the scale that gives you the best leverage for the time investment, the civil society you're building through the process, but doesn't grind you to a stop?
So the greatest percentage of the budget that's been allocated through PB in general is around 20%, which actually means most of the discretionary funds. So the majority of any budget each year is set aside in advance. We're talking about the money that's in play in a given year. And there's certainly a lot of growth still in New York to get to that level, and a lot of opportunity as well to increase the size of the pot. And then beyond New York City, we see this as, we hope this is the new way to do public budgeting across the US, as it has become across the world, with over 3,000 cities now doing participatory budgeting. So there's immense potential for scaling up there, bringing in federal funds. HUD is very supportive of participatory budgeting, and there's a lot of growth we expect from that.
And like I mentioned before, we're also thinking of expanding it into public housing, and as we see, the mayor's office and the administration sort of looking at this as a practice that they also want to expand in their different city agencies. So, it's interesting, and I think it'll continue to sort of push the envelope.
Josh, you alluded to this before, but it's not in your application. I wanted to be get a clearer sense of this. In one sense, this is about basically $1 million per council district for those that are participating. But what you seemed to say was some of the results that came out of the process were affecting other budgetary decisions of a larger dollar amount. So I want to get a clearer sense, to the degree I can, about the informing of the broader city budget that comes through this process, that's not necessarily reflected in the $1 million chunks.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of projects get funded that actually don't make it to the ballot. They instead go to an agency, and the agency says we can do that with our own budget instead. And this gives them a systematic way to get input from the wide swath of the community, not just the squeaky wheels. And at first, we've seen agencies were a bit reluctant, weren't sure of the process, and more they're seeing this is a way to get things funded, to get good ideas, to build support for good ideas. And that on average, for every $5 million spent in PB, there's been an additional $1 million that's been allocated by agencies from their own budgets. I expect that to keep growing.
We heard earlier from the Oregon team about the process forcing trade-offs in decision-making. One of the things I was told many years ago when I was in city government was part of our job was to help people understand the trade-offs associated with making or not making a decision, because demands will always outstrip what you have available. Can you give us an example or an anecdote where the process helped people understand that there really are trade-offs associated with the decision, and if we do A, we can't do B? Have you seen that type of dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I see it every time I go to a voting site, and that's one thing I think people don't realize is that people aren't just coming out, checking a box and going home. Often they will spend 15 minutes poring over the ballots, realizing all these projects should be done. And that's when it becomes a difficult decision, when they have to balance those competing needs and recognize that there's only so much money, and how do we prioritize from amongst the projects on the ballot. So I see people going in really wanting computers for their school, walking out having not voted for that project because they were so impressed by the other projects that they voted for them instead. And seeing that, that balancing of needs going on in people's heads and through dialogue with their neighbors, I think is really fascinating.
That's a very, so the ballot has 6 different things they can vote for? Is that
Some
how?
have more, some have more.
Or 20, whatever?
Yeah.
And so they can vote for the top 2, is that how it works?
Top 5 in most of the cases, yeah.
Great, that's very, very interesting. And then, I love the idea that you get 14-year-olds to, and is it difficult to get the 14-year-olds? Can you work with the teachers to get more? I mean, I would like every 14, because I think it's a great way, to have more people vote, because I figure if they start voting when they're 14, they'll continue to vote. So is there an
Yes.
effort to get more people to vote?
Yes, certainly.
Please.
This year we just announced the results of our PBNYC process this morning. We just put it out publicly, and some of the preliminary results show that 1 out of 10 participants were younger than 18. So fantastic results. And council members were very creative in engaging young people. They went to some classrooms. Some teachers were very engaged, and so they brought them over. And also with our text messaging platform this year, we tried to really sort of engage as many young people as we could, because that's where we can meet them at. So certainly, I think that's going to be a growing thing in the program.
And do they vote differently than the adults? Or can you tell? You may not be able to tell.
For different projects,
Yeah.
it varies.
Yeah, we don't have the details in front of us, but
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times they will develop projects themselves and get very excited about those, obviously. So projects for their neighborhood or school, and take real ownership over their school, their community, and then invest more in it. And we've seen that there's also a spillover effects of actually starting school participatory budgeting processes where they're allocating how to spend money in their own school from the school budget.
Well, that's very exciting. And do you have any other questions? Well, thank you very much. That was a really good presentation.